stress three aspects of the question. First, when it comes to civil society representation, persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities are generally not as well represented as persons with other kinds of disabilities. And one prerequisite to fight for psychiatric interventions is good representation on the NGO level, on the DPO level. Talking from the Swiss perspective, we do not have a forceful representation from the side of civil society. That means it's up to a certain degree of existing civil society institutions to address these issues. And I would very much encourage current civil society institutions to actually do that, to change their perspectives, their long-held views of what is important, and address the issues of pertaining to persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities much more forcefully than in the past. Now, I would also stress, as it has been before, that work with the professional community is indispensable. From my experience, I did not encounter strong resistance that I expected. To the contrary, the professional organizations with whom I interacted, or with whom I have interacted this far, were very much open to the CRPD's mandate. They were, however, to a certain degree at the loss of how to implement it. And that brings me to the third issue. That is one issue that, again, falls back to the CRPD. We've formulated the basic principle: no forced psychiatric interventions. And I think after 10 years, we can take it for granted that this thing stands within the CRPD. However, we have not been very good at at addressing the hard issues that need to be addressed. Alberto referred to them as emergencies. We can call them emergencies, or just these areas need to be addressed also from the international level. Maybe working together with the WHO in order to alleviate the fears that society and professional communities still have with respect to not intervene forcibly in these areas. I think that's the part that falls onto the CRPD committee and the rest of the community within which it operates.
Okay, thank you, Markus. And I think in relation to your comments, it's one thing that I would wonder is that when there's a situation where there isn't a forceful representation of this constituency at the DPO level, I think we might also want to ask why and what are the conditions that lead to that, and if there are organizations that are involved, but they may experience an environment in which they're impeded from actually coming forward. So I don't know anything about the situation in Switzerland, but I know that in some countries there are disability federations where there's a family organization involved. So I would just wonder about that, and you may want to comment on that or not. And I think both of you and Sharon also both raised the need, the sense that people may feel that they're at a loss for how to actually proceed to implementation. When I hear that, I think there is a need for more to be done in a more systematized way. I think WHO has actually done more than anyone else. Also, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has attempted to flesh some of this out, and the Special Rapporteur on Health, and certainly the DPOs have. And at the same time, I think there's somewhat of a gap in terms of people necessarily talking to each other, or where can people go to actually raise the questions they have? If you just hear the absolute prohibition and you think, oh, but that can't work because what do we do in an emergency situation? And you see that the CRPD committee has said in their guidelines on Article 14, well, and in their general comment on Article 12, that the right to legal capacity still exists, including in crisis or emergency situations that cannot justify forced treatment. And we cannot adhere to this idea of danger to self or others, but what do we actually do? And where I believe that the questions are answered, but where can people go to actually have those discussions and make sure that, you know, what some of us think is answered, you know, maybe it's not, or maybe it actually is, but the knowledge is not fully distributed, or I don't know, it's not disseminated because everyone, it has to be interactive and sharing this work together. So that's, I would actually, in that regard, I would like to invite people to look up a paper, a very short paper that I've written called Positive Policy to Replace Forced Psychiatry, that actually addresses that very question. And, you know, that may at some point serve as a basis for some discussions, but now I'd also like to just go to the floor and invite people to bring in your experiences, your questions for the panelists, and yeah, we have, I'd like to say 20 minutes for general discussion, and then I'll bring it back to panelists for their concluding remarks for the last 10 minutes. So the floor is open. Yes, Luri.
Thank you very much for very interesting comments. I have one question, and it's addressing this question of emergency, the notion of emergency when it comes to the application of use of force in psychiatry. Because I recall that before the Human Rights Office said that force could be used, but it should be delinked from disability, so to apply to all in a neutral manner. So the question is actually that you mentioned, Tina, that you think the answer is there, that legal capacity is absolute in any context, but I just question actually whether that is exactly if this is the meaning of the full panel, that towards persons with disability there is never room for the use of force even in emergency cases. Because I'm just looking at like a roadmap to end use of force, and I also think we need to work parallelly to somehow circumscribe the context as narrow as possibly and in a non-discriminatory manner in legal reforms, and also then develop alternatives. But I'm just wondering what the panel is actually holding as the opinion. Is there an emergency, is there room for use of force in emergency if it can be found a way to that it can be applied neutrally and non-discriminatorily? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think we will take 2 more questions. We'll take 3 at a time. Bethany?
Hi. My question is about what the ask is for psychiatrists. I agree that we should work to get everyone on board, but what is the role that you envision them playing in a world where they don't have this sort of hammer to hang over people's heads?
Thank you. And one more question? Stephen.
Yes, thank you very much for organising this fascinating discussion, a very important discussion. I think there's 2 points I'd like to make. One probably is the need, I think, to open up some more direct dialogue between the CRPD committee, organisations of users and survivors of psychiatry, but also the psychiatric community. I mean, it seems to me that those representatives need to be in a room, and that discussion needs to be led by users and survivors directly, because I think it's clear and important to recognise that there is a preponderance of opinion globally from the World Psychiatric Association